Recording in progress.
Okay, if everyone is ready, my 7 minutes will start now. Hi, my name is Marcus Hahn, and I will be the first affirmative speaker for Camp Orlando High School. We stand to strongly affirm the resolution that heads of public universities like deans, chancellors, and etc. should be elected by the student body for a couple of definitions. One, public universities are universities of higher education that are owned by the state. Good examples of these are the University of California system schools. The second piece of resolutional analysis that we're going to give to you is that this is a policy round as indicated by the word should. This means that the weighing mechanism for today's round is going to be net benefits, or who creates the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people. The plan text for today's round is going to be that heads of public universities, such as deans, chancellors, and etc., should be elected by the student body every 5 years with no term limits. The implication is this. Because it is mostly routine for chancellors and deans to be reappointed every 5 years, it is simply just a change from appointing to election every 5 years. The first affirmative advantage is that of university inner workings. The one point under here is systems of power. The warrantation here is that the power imbalance between head and non-head of the university is very large. When we look to accessibility between those who are not in power, those who are not able to reach those in power, it is very large, especially within public universities. We see that many within the UC systems don't feel like they have an accessible chance to make change on their chancellor, number one, but also be able to reach them. The second point under here is that elections are a direct way to check back on this. We see that student body leaders, or so the student body can elect these specific leaders, which leads to a check on these systems of power. So what is the implication? Like, what is the meaning behind of this? That leads us to the second point under here of accountability. Currently, the dean or chancellor is appointed by the board, and the students have no say in what happens here. This means that students don't really have a choice as to who represents their university and who gets to make policies determining their fate on campus. This means that when students have elections, they're able to hold their leaders accountable for actions that they may have done. For example, if they elect one leader and the actions of the leader do not fit what they would like, they're able to re-elect another person at the next election in the next 5 years. The C point under here, and this is where we really look at impacts, is that we see that colleges are these bastion of democratic values. We see that people become highly educated when they go to college, and we see that colleges have a huge role in facilitating our democratic procedures. But right now, what we see is that there has been a increased polarization and an increased tendency to push away from others on a political spectrum, away from each other. We see this specifically, as one New York Times reporter points out, in the fact that since colleges have done away with certain things that increase civic engagement, like having a specific civic engagement course, this means that people are no longer focusing on creating these democratic values at these universities. Having specific student elections that elect a leader not only trains future democratic citizens, but also allows voters to be more involved in the political process, which transfers over to national stage elections and local stage elections. We saw that in 2020, only 2/3 of voters showed out for the election, and this starts with universities teaching their students to be able to vote, and not only the importance of it, but why they should be doing it. The impacts are a couple of things. The first is that democracy is really, really important because it leads to very strong policies that can either harm people in ways such as economics, but also like military, but in the ways that it's really important that you voice what you're trying to do. We see that net benefits can be framed through this lens of democracy, and that if you implement a policy that is really harmful to someone, you can lead them to be stuck in poverty or harm their economic conditions. The second affirmative advantage is that of diversity. The one point under here is that while America has very racially and ethnically diverse student bodies, the public university's leadership does not reflect this. The warrantation under here is that, for example, white men hold the majority of leadership decisions in the University of California and the Cal State University system, even though 2/3 of undergraduates identify as Latino, Black, Asian, or Native. The B point under here is that even though 69% of students are ethnically or racially diverse, over 60% of college faculty and senior leadership and 74% of academic senators are white. What we see is that there's a huge imbalance between the actual student body and the elected officials that we have in these public universities. The second point under here is that women are also underrepresented. The little a is that although 54% of California college students are women, women are underrepresented among faculty, and they only make up 33% of California public school senior leadership. The B point under here is that only 2/9 of the UC campuses are headed by women. What we see specifically here is that not only racially, but also with gender, there's an imbalance with their student leadership. So what is the impact? Why is representation important? And this is an issue that has been chased after by our leaders globally, but also our leaders on the university scale. Answering this question, diversity is ultimately important because it increases representation and students perform better academically when they see people like themselves in leadership positions. The A point under here is that the U.S. Department of Education found that higher rates of diversity in a university's leadership led to higher graduation rates. The B point under here is that the study found that minority students performed better when they saw someone with the same race in a university leadership. The C point under here is that nearly 80% of Americans polled by US News said that they believe that higher education leaders are failing students, not developing them. So when you look at the affirmative, specifically on the diversity advantage, you're going to see that there's a problem. There's a problem that, number one, people are not represented both ethnically and with regards to their sex. And the second point under we see here is that many believe that their university leaders are failing them, that they're not developing them. And the third implication on this advantage is that we see a proven link that our education levels go up when we see specifically people that look like us in these higher leadership positions. When we terminalize these impacts, we see that higher education is the key to upwards mobility. We see that many people who are structurally harmed by policies and who are in economic conditions like poverty, which are really cyclical and hard to get out of, that higher education is a way for them to break out of these cycles. We see that the median salary of college graduates is way higher than those, on average, than those who don't have a college degree. This is really, really important for minority groups who are stuck in these who are forced into these cycles of poverty and can use higher education as a way to bootstrap themselves out of these situations. When you look at the affirmative, there are two clear outs for the app. The first is university inner workings, and the second is that diversity is uniquely key to solving education. For those reasons, I strongly affirm.
All right, starting my time now. Okay, we strongly believe that heads of public universities, such as deans and chancellors, should not be elected by the student body. We agree with their weighing mechanism and their plan. And now moving into our case, after I go over our case, I'm going to do some rebuttals to their case. Our first contention is expertise. So picking the head of a public university is a challenging and vital task which requires great expertise, experience, and familiarity with both the roles and the candidates. Students simply lack the expertise to judge whether or not a potential candidate would make a good head of the university. They have no standard by which to judge the quality of leadership. In comparison, the current system in which members of the university's board vote on the president, which involves more expertise and so can be assumed to better represent the interests of the university, which the professors understand far more intimately than the students, having been there for longer and enjoyed more familiarity with higher education as a system. So the impacts we're going to see here is that when we have worse heads of university, we're going to see worse function of the university, leading to poorer experience for students, possibly including worse classes or weaker financial aid. Now moving into our second contention, which is politics. So as we see in almost every election, the person that campaigns well is not necessarily the person who is best at the job. Our first subpoint under this is likability. So there's this common phenomenon of the beer question. Which candidate do you find to be more relatable? Which candidate do you think is a more interesting or fun person? This isn't just a conversation topic. It's an actual academic phenomenon. In the US, Canada, and France, which candidate would you prefer to have a beer with is an actual topic that is polled around elections. This shows us that likability plays a huge role in who is elected and so this means that the presidency is going to come down to, in large part, who candidates like. Two reasons on why this is bad. First off, likability does not equal competence. This is a huge managerial job, which spans a great deal of research, student engagement, economic issues, etc. The goal should, as we outlined in our first contention, be to prioritize the best possible president. Second is discrimination. When you judge on likability, you undermine women and people of color. They do far less well on this front. This is because they're far more likely to be perceived as dumb, and they're more likely to be perceived as rude, bossy, or bratty. Why do we want people of color in these and women in these positions? Our opponents did a really great job of outlining this. Yes, people of color and women have traditionally been kept out of academic institutions and are often pushed out of high power spaces due to sexism and racism. It's helpful to encourage presidents with this lived experience so that they can actively combat these presences on campus and show students that anything is possible. However, we provide a much clearer explanation how allowing students to vote is going to decrease diversity in college presidents. Now, moving on to our second subpoint on our second contention, which is campaign promises. So most of the time, politicians don't follow through on their campaign promises. This is because campaign promises are more based on what will be the most widely liked and what will encourage people to vote for them. They don't really have any burden to think about feasibility or what their plan is to accomplish these goals. So we see that when they get to office, they often have no mechanism to accomplish the things that they set out to do. So what we see here is that voting doesn't prioritize effective change, and as such, students' needs aren't acted on. Whereas in an opposition world, candidates will not only be judged on the strength of their ideas, but on their plans to execute said ideas. This is going to lead to more tangible good for both the university and the students. You want to be voting here on which side is more likely to provide good for the students, and that is clearly the opposition side. Our third contention is engagement. Our first subpoint here is voting. So the majority of young people don't even bother to vote in presidential elections, much less local elections for Congress or state government. Why would they even bother to show up for these elections? They won't. Ergo, the elections would likely be in the hands of a few random students, which is like the status quo, but infinitely worse, or in the hands of extreme groups or paid voters. So the impact here is that a poor selection process is going to lead to worse candidates and worse school functioning. Subpoint B is awareness. On a similar note, it is incredibly difficult to do research on political candidates. Even for presidential campaigns, people rarely do enough research, and they often do none at all for less important elections. Moreover, students are busy. They don't have time to do enough research to make a highly informed decision. Students will fail to do research, and thus the few students who do vote will be uninformed or underinformed, unlike the status quo in which voters are deeply informed. So the impact here is that poor and uninformed selection of candidates is going to lead to poor school functioning. Subpoint C here is motivation. As we see with movements like the moral majority, the highest voter turnout comes from the most extreme and zealous groups. This means that in a mass voting system, the extreme parties on campus will control the presidency of their university, not the student body as a whole, because those are the people who want to make the time to do all of this intensive research, who are actually going to come out to the polls. So what are the impacts here? We're going to see political unrest on campus and hyper-politicization of campus, which leads to a less enjoyable campus experience, possibly more risk of campus political violence, not to mention an undemocratic selection process. Fourth is logistics. Public universities tend to be very large, with tens of thousands of undergraduates and possibly an equal number of possibly an equal or greater number of graduate students. Texas A&M, for instance, has 70,000 total graduate and undergraduate students. Over an election for over 70K students would be a huge logistical nightmare and a huge expense. Election overseers would need to be hired, physical booths set up, et cetera, et cetera. This would also take away from the day-to-day administration of the university. So the impact here is that we see high cost and difficulty for the university, leading to less money and more hassle for the university, leading to a poor student experience and worse functioning of the university. Fourth contention is competence. So candidates will have to spend more time on their campaign than actually administering, making them worse at their job. Congress people often report that they spend more hours asking for money on the phone than on the floor of Congress voting for bills, because that money is what will help them win the election and stay in their seat. Having an electoral system would force candidates to be politicians instead of administrators and spend time running for re-election rather than working. So the impacts we're going to see here are worse administration and a worse school. All right, now moving into the government case. First, on systems of power. Their first subpoint here is an imbalance of power. By nature, any hierarchy will have a strong imbalance of power. Even if we switch to an election system, the only people who could be the chancellor of a university will come from a small pool of wealthy academics who can legally accept the position and have the money to campaign properly. Ergo, it is more likely that the wealthy, charismatic chancellor will win rather than the competent. Now, on to their subpoint about accountability. So elections are not a direct check on, or at the most, this is a wash. In both worlds, there's an election system. One is simply larger and one is smaller. If anything, accountability is higher when the electorate is better informed, not distracted by classes, and not able to be harmed by the candidate or their allies. Then on democratic values, first off, college students can already vote in federal elections. If only 2/3 of these students showed up for federal elections, why would many of them show up for these university elections? Yeah.
When you say the current electorate, who's electing or choosing the president right now?
It tends to be the board of directors and the board of governors, but that tends to be a far more research intensive process that tends to involve a lot of interviews with students, that tends to involve making sure that they hear from diverse student groups, and reaching out to these students individually makes sure that you get a far more diverse sampling of campus and you have time to have in-depth conversations about them instead of relying on these platitudes that you often see in elections. We also see incredibly low turnout in local elections, and that a lot of the time when the ballot gets too complicated or too hard to understand, that people just don't vote because that seems like too much work. It seems too complicated. You're going to see even more kids turned off of voting. But what you are going to see is this intense politicization where only extreme groups vote, making campus a more hostile space, leading to less openness to civil discussion, leading to less openness to openly debating ideas. Now moving on to diversity. On to their second tension of diversity. So A, universities will never reflect this in the government's plan. In the government world, wealthy and charismatic candidates will win, most of them white and male, all of them well off, rather than good or underrepresented candidates. Most public universities are majority white anyways. The UCs are an anomaly because California is a more diverse state than most of the country, but the lower rungs of academics are majority people of color. So if anything, the professors will be more diverse and more inclined to vote for a non-white candidate. We actually turn this point. If wealth and race matter in federal elections, they will matter in university elections. And so the upper rungs of academics and the presidents of public universities will be wealthier and less diverse in a government world. That's our main refutation to their second contention. My partner will have time to go more in depth on that in his speech. So proud to oppose. Thank you all for your time.
Okay. Okay, sorry. I have 8 minutes on the clock. Is anybody not ready? Okay, in that case, my order will just be the affirmations case and then the negations case. Okay. My time begins now. Hello, judges. My name is Maureen Kang, and I'll be the second speaker on behalf of the affirmative. I'm strongly affirming this resolution. So first of all, judges, on our first point, which is systems of power, my opponents say that it's just going to be more rich and charismatic people who are going to be winning because they're going to be campaigning and acting more like politicians than academic leaders. But this is not true at all. And this is for all the reasons that we bring up in our second point, diversity. People are going to be more likely to vote for the people that they want to see in office. My partner also read to you a statistic saying nearly 80% of people believe that university leaders right now are failing them. If people are unhappy, then they're going to want to make a change and they're going to vote for the people who think are going to bring that change. My opponents also responded in response to our accountability point. They say that that the current electorate that is currently selecting these university leaders is more informed right now. And they mentioned that like the faculty and senators and boards are voting. But we've already read to you warrantation about how over 60% of current university faculty and leadership is white. We're reading to you that there is not a lot of diversity within the leadership and within the faculty themselves, which means that the students are the only way to check back against it. In the current affirmations world right now, everything that my opponents are telling you that, oh, the faculty are just more informed, the people that are currently making these decisions right now are actually going to be better selecting for it. This process has been going on for like a while. Everything that we've seen leading up to this point is because of what the negation is trying to tell you is better. Right now, the only way to try to fix away and move away from what we are seeing right now is to actually switch this and move to our plan, which is going to be allowing these university students to elect their president. My opponents also mentioned that that voting is going to be too complicated and that students won't be willing to vote. But judges, again, like, first of all, like, why is the ballot going to be complicated? It's literally going to be, who do you want to be your university leader? It's a very simple procedure. It's going to be very, very simple, and students are going to be willing to engage in this process. My opponents also don't respond at all to any of your points about how this is going to be increasing political efficacy. It's going to be increasing votership. And my partner read to you a ton of warrantation about how right now colleges have been decreasing courses that are looking at specific like civic engagement. So we're seeing that this is actually an act that's going to be helping students learn real time what is an election like, and it's going to be helping them learn a lot more about the political processes. You can also extend everything that we read to you about how policies are going to be affected by this, because the students who engage in these specific processes are going to be taking this real world education to their careers, to their jobs in the future. On to our second point, which is about diversity. First of all, my opponents don't really touch on this a lot, but what they do say is that the people that the students elect are still going to be white. But the thing is, like, why would this happen? We've already read to you a ton of warrantation about how universities are very diverse. They respond by saying it's just California, but the thing is, a lot of other states out there are still very diverse. And even so, it's better that we make this change to try to make as much positive benefits as we can. It's better that we make this change and make a little bit of a benefit than not making a change at all and not having any benefit at all. The only risk that we're going to be getting this is the only risk of solvency is that we're going to be doing something that makes at least a little bit of good, which is better than nothing at all. My opponents also say that like professors are going to be choosing more diverse candidates, but again, over 60% of faculty is white. We've already told you this. Right now, what we told you right now about how 74% of senators are white. This is because of the faculty that are currently electing them into place. Right now, they are currently electing white men into these specific leadership positions, which is what students do not want to have. Everything else that we read to you about how students perform better academically when they see somebody who is more diverse in a position of power, this goes completely cold conceded. My opponents don't respond to this at all. So you can flow through and extend everything that we tell you about how more diversity leads to higher graduation rates, more diversity leads to better grades, and more diversity allows students to believe that they can do and pursue their own career goals because they're seeing someone who looks like them. You can also extend everything that my partner told you about how this is going to be helping students break out of poverty. Again, people with college degrees get higher median incomes, and you can see that because students perform academically and they're more likely to stay in college if they see someone who looks like them in a university position, it's going to be benefiting them even more. Now on to my opponent's case. First of all, on expertise. They say that it's going to be requiring a lot of expertise and experience, but the thing is, like, saying that students lack expertise is the logic of like opponents of democracy. Right now, you have to be thinking about, although yes, students might be like thinking, okay, maybe I want this person. Obviously, they're going to want to choose the person who they think will be doing the job the best. And this is just done through elections. This is just a process. This is the way that we elect our own government, our own country's government, which is why it's really important that we try to enact this in schools today. My opponents also mentioned that we're going to be seeing worse function and that the elected presidents aren't going to be able to do much more. But this is not true. Judges, the logic jump is like, it's such a far like jump. You can't really bridge it with this specific thing. Just because students choose who they want to be in office doesn't mean that financial aid is going to be decreasing. This is a huge jump. You shouldn't be allowing them to make this connection. On their point about politics, first of all, they talk about likability. But first of all, judges, this is probably a good thing because it's going to be leading to a lot more diversity. Students want the people who they want to be in office. Also, likability is going to be decreased when incompetency increases. And so we've seen this. Elections on like a 5-year cycle, on your 5-year cycle solves for this. It's going to be leading to a lot less campus turmoil if people are liking their leader because they're the ones who chose these people. They're the ones who elected them into office. My opponents also mentioned that like women and people of color are going to be considered less likable, which is why people won't be actually electing them into office. First of all, obviously I'm a woman. I would love to see a woman in office. That'd be awesome. And people would want to see themselves or people who look like them in higher positions of power. Also, again, everything that the negation is telling you, how we should keep it all the same, how everything is going to be great the way that it is right now, that has already been happening, and that's led to the huge power imbalance that we're seeing right now. You can sort of see this as like a triad. Like we have to make a change in order to make anything that's going to be positive. If we stay stagnant and we do what my opponents are trying to tell you to do, that means that we aren't going to be making any change at all and we won't be moving forward. My opponents also talk about how these specific academic leaders won't be able to deliver on their campaign promises. But first of all, this isn't unique. Neither do like appointees. But then the thing is that they do not provide the students like any ideas of, oh, this is what I'm advocating for. This is what I want to do. This is what I want to implement, which means that students get less of a say. Also, it's just fundamentally wrong. You can turn this, elected officials have constraints and they're going to be like under pressure to succeed because they know that they won't be up for real election if they aren't able to deliver on their campaign promises. Now onto what my opponents mentioned about engagement and about how students won't be voting. First of all, judges, please. Of course, students will want to vote for their community leadership, for their college leadership. Also, college students are statistically seen to be more politically active than the normal American. Obviously, college students are there to get an education. They're there to research. They're there to learn. So that makes sense. That means that college students will be doing their research when it comes to these political candidates, especially because this is a very local thing. Whoever they elect is going to be directly affecting their own education and their next 4 years at this college. Also, what they say about it's going to be extremely right and left wing. This is not true. This is only true with like primary elections. But also the thing is that colleges are supposed to be bastion of information. They're trying to encourage all different kinds of viewpoints. The negation is really speculative. They're saying, oh, students won't want to vote or do anything. And on our logistics point, it's not that hard. It's very, very simple to vote. And for those reasons, I urge a strong affirmation ballot.
All right, second opposition speech. Off time or on time roadmap? Judge's preference? I'll do off time then. Just quickly gonna go back into the op case and then into the gov case and take a look at the round if I have time. Time starts in 3, 2, 1. In response to the opposition contention on expertise, the government says that it's undemocratic, that students are going to choose the person they think will do the job best. And it's important to enact this. Yes, democracy involves people choosing the person they think will do best for the job. But as we have proven to you already in the contention, it is not always a good thing. They simply say democracy will happen, not that democracy is inherently better than the system that we have now. There's a reason we don't let treasonous votes, not to mention children. There's a reason we have a Congress that enacts laws, not the general population. There's a reason that we have a republic in this country, not a true full democracy, because it's simply logistically difficult, as we've already explained. Not to mention, not everyone has the expertise or the time to properly participate in the democratic process. The people on the election committee, on the appointment boards, in the status quo, are paid to do this. It is their job to do this specifically. This is their only role for several months, whereas students are busy with classes and being students, having childhoods, not electing officials. And as the government told you, 2/3 of people already didn't vote in federal elections. They give you orientation on why there's a lack of engagement, why there's a lack of interest in democracy. So then why would you ever accept that an expansion of democracy into the university system is going to lead to better elections or to better appointments? Onto our con 2 on politics. They say that likability is the same thing as diversity, that likability decreases when incompetence increases. Elections on a 5-year cycle will lead to less campus turmoil. First of all, no. If there are student groups campaigning for specific candidates, if elections are political on campus, it's naturally going to be more political. There's going to be more turmoil. Elections are by their nature political. And as we've already warranted to you, student groups are going to be extreme and going to be responsible for the majority of the elections and who votes, as we see in the real world. Also, likability is never actually refuted here. They don't give you a reason why students will choose a likable candidate over a popular candidate, over a competent candidate. They just say that likability is a good thing or likability is okay. They say on our point about representation and discrimination that of course people want to see themselves represented. And of course people do want to, we acknowledge that. People want to see themselves represented, but they don't give you an actual impact. They give you this vague correlation between diversity and academic success, but they don't provide an actual mechanism. There has been an increase in diversity and college graduation in the US in general anyway. They provide no actual causatory link between these two phenomena. And we have also warranted to you why diversity is stronger on the op side, because the people who win elections, as they warranted to you, tend to be white and male and wealthy, whereas people who are running for office as political appointees now are less likely to be white and wealthy and male because they don't have to be. They don't have to pay for campaigns. They don't have to pay for ads. They don't have to be necessarily popular as long as they are competent and is known by the election committee. Also, on the point about campaign promises, they say that it's non-unique, but in fact, we see in the real world countless politicians, maybe all of them, don't follow through on their campaign promises, whereas appointees are much more likely to in the cases of, say, judges and sheriffs that are appointed in small towns. But if you look at presidents like Trudeau in Canada, they have fulfilled none of their promises, and they don't need to. They're just better than the other guy, and so they are chosen time and again because they're preferable, but not actually good. On our con 3 on engagement, they say that vote, sure.
Yeah, so do systems of like appointing in like large scale political systems, are those generally better than democratic ones in electing good officials? I know you use the example Trudeau. Like, is that is that what the
yeah.
negative position is?
Yeah, so on small scales, it has been observed in American small towns that appointing judges and sheriffs leads to better judges and sheriffs, less corrupt judges and sheriffs than the opposite. When they run, they A, waste time on running, B, get corrupt because they have to raise money for campaigning. So we have actual historical academic evidence that appointed officials in certain circumstances in American environments that are similar to universities are superior to elected officials repeatedly and demonstrably. That's actually a very good question. So on con 3 on engagement, they say that college students vote more than the average American. No, college students protest more than the average American. They don't necessarily vote. A lot of them think the democratic process doesn't work and just refuse to vote, or are too lazy to, or it's too difficult for them to do so. So they don't. They are the majority of that 2/3 of people that didn't vote. They don't do their research. People never do their research. It's just too tiresome. Students especially are incredibly busy. They don't have time to do that. They're not necessarily more invested because of local elections. Anything, they're less. Who actually voted for their local alderman? Or for their congressperson, for that matter? No one. People pay attention more to federal elections than they do to local elections. Colleges are supposed to be bastions of ideas, but clearly that hasn't worked if college students aren't voting, if people in general aren't voting. On our con 4 on competence, they give you no real response. As we have already warranted to you, candidates who have to spend more time raising money and campaigning are going to be less good at their jobs and put less time into it. Now, going back into the government case. On their con one about systems of power, they repeat their points. They said it's untrue that people are unhappy, but that's not a reason to change the system, or rather, they're not going to necessarily be happier in the better system. They see that they're being failed. They see that their leadership is not diverse. But as we already warranted to you, the leadership is more diverse in the op world. The leadership, as they tell you, is less diverse in elected officials. 74% of their senators are white, and 70% of academic faculty are white. Or no, 70%. Yeah, 70%. That's more than there are white people. That's less white people in the US. The US is overwhelmingly white. Academia is less white. It's also a global endeavor, so comparing it to US demographics makes no sense. They say that the ballot is complicated. All ballots are complicated. The US election ballots are just complicated. It's hard to do. They're really confusing. People often vote for the wrong candidate that they don't mean to vote for because the layout is weird. Students, as we've already warned you, aren't willing to engage. They are lazy, they're bored, or they think the system doesn't work, or they're busy with other stuff. Policies won't necessarily be affected by this in real education. Now, moving on to their con two on diversity, they say again, 74% of senators are white. That why would this happen? Universities are diverse. We give you warrantation on how likability in elections disadvantages women or people of color. They simply rely on platitudes, but we rely on evidence. On subpoint B, we have told you repeatedly, elected officials often fail their electorate, fail their voters, and more so than appointed officials because they are actually less accountable and because they are more invested in other non-administrative tasks like campaigning and raising money. They are more likely to be corrupt because they have more necessity for being bribed in order to maintain power. Congressmen report, for instance, that they spend more time on the phone begging for money for campaigns than actually on the floor of Congress voting for bills. And they're prone to being corrupt in the United States. On their con C, they simply tell you college degrees are good, but the inflation of college degrees means that whatever little value college degrees have is going down. And as we have seen, the rhetoric that college is the main way people can socially advance in society is simply a smokescreen for all the problems in society. They're just buying into this conservative logic that if you go to college and you work really hard, you'll naturally escape generational poverty that your family's been trapped in. The number one metric for your future income is your parents' current income, not your college major, not the college that you went to, not even where you were born, just that. The system is inherently corrupt and broken in terms of poverty, but going to college doesn't actually fix that problem. And even if it does have a little impact, the fact that more and more people are going to college all around the world, that the value of a degree is deflating, means that it's going to matter less and less and less until the only thing that provides any kind of social mobility is a PhD, and PhDs are already being overproduced in the United States. So let's take a quick look at the round and the voting issues here. So we give you expertise. We give you basically the quality of the candidate through both expertise and politics. They say essentially simply democracy is good and diversity is good. These are the only voting systems that the government gives you, but we have given you the voters of expertise. We've given you the voters of politics, which mostly mean that the candidates are not going to be the best candidates. They're not going to be selected for competence. They're going to be selected for other reasons that have nothing to do with it. Then we give you engagement. And we tell you that the election itself will be difficult to run if it is able to be run at all. It's going to be logistically difficult. It's going to be expensive. People aren't going to be interested in it. They're not going to come to it. They already don't come for the elections for the president of the United States, arguably the most powerful human being on the planet and the most powerful and most important politician in their country. Why would they show up for the election of the head of the university that they might not even care for, certainly won't ever see or meet or even see on TV, and who might not actually have a tangible impact on their life? And on our con for going into grace period, they never respond to this. We tell you in no uncertain terms, these candidates are just going to be worse because they're going to be busy with other things that aren't their job, as we see in all elected officials in the status quo in the US government. Thank you.
All right, is everyone ready? All right, in that case, I'm going to start my time now. Okay, so I'm going to spend this speech talking about some of the main voter issues in this round. First off, let's talk about diversity. They don't really give you any real mechanism for achieving this. They just tell you why it's good to have diversity, which we completely agree with. All of their impacts are true. It's good if kids have diverse leaders. It's good if kids have leaders who look like them. Yes, it does lead to kids being more likely to stay in school. It leaves them feeling more supportive on the college candidate. However, if an opposition vote allows for more diverse candidates, which it does given the warranting that they've run this round, then the opposition has access to the positive impacts of diversity. Keep in mind that in their final speech, they can't introduce new warrants. They can, of course, expand upon their existing warrants, but they can't introduce anything new. So let's talk about likability and why it's such a bad thing. Our opponent's main response to this was that people want to see themselves represented, but that doesn't necessarily change who people like as an elected official. There are a few reasons for this. First of all, we have very entrenched ideas about what an official should look like that do play a role. It's just subconscious bias. Even people who don't look like their elected officials do on some level have that bias. Furthermore, this idea of likability very much prioritizes wealthy candidates. It prioritizes candidates who know how to speak to a crowd. who know how to speak to a crowd. It's not necessarily about, again, it's not about relatability. It's about likability. They also talk a lot about how like administrate like school faculty is a bad way to choose this because it's 60% white. The US is 70% white. So that's actually a more diverse way of choosing than just letting the US population choose. Furthermore, elections are less accessible to diverse candidates. It is incredibly expensive to run an election, even on a college campus. This means two things. First of all, wealthier candidates have an upper hand. Second of all, candidates have more incentive to go for ideas that will give them financial backing rather than the ideas that might actually attract voters, because you simply can't get around the fact that like you need money to run a campaign. You need people running your staff. You need people getting your ideas out there, et cetera, et cetera. So we see that we provide you two mechanisms for how elections create less diverse candidates. One, likability. Two, elections are less accessible for diverse candidates. And it's because of the money involved. Whereas they simply tell you that like kids want to see leaders who look like them, but they don't warrant this point out in any real way. They just rely on platitudes. Okay, now moving on to engagement and democracy. They tell you that kids will be more engaged because it's a small local election that directly impacts their lives. However, we see that local elections have incredibly low voter turnout. A college deanship is way more comparable to a mayor than a president of a country. So you aren't really going to access this idea of like more civic engagement. Colleges cutting civic engagement programs is like a very different problem that like across the country we're emphasizing democracy and civic engagement less. It's not a symptom of the fact that like college deans aren't elected. These are like, they never clearly explain the link between these two ideas. Now let's go into the main voter issue of this round, which is really like, how do you get the most effective leader? They have some questions about how having effective leaders leads to good for students. Just to clarify this link a little bit, if you have a stronger leader with, say, a more knowledge of how to run a financially large institution, the university has more money to spend on students. If you're talking to like a smaller, like carefully selected panel that like that has time to do in-depth research, you're going to be more required to come up with like very clear plans for how you want to accomplish your goals. It's going to involve looking at all sides of the university, not just like the sides that students are necessarily aware of, because a lot of the times there are things going on in university, like financial aid is a really good example of this, where students might not fully understand the like financial side of their schools. They just know that they want more money. So like having a team that understands the financial side of their schools in like overall can help colleges become more affordable. Well, overall, we want to have the most effective leaders, and the best way to get the most effective leaders, the most diverse leaders, is to allow them to be chosen rather than elected. Because elections are overwhelming, most voters are uninformed, and because of the intense time it takes to run an election. For all of those reasons, could not be prouder to oppose. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay. The order is going to be overview, two voting issues, and then defense and then responses to the neg. Is anyone not ready? My time begins now. Judges, the affirmative is clearly ahead on the diversity advantage when the negative is massively undercovering most of the warrants that we give you and is using largely speculative analysis as to why it doesn't work. Let's first move to the diversity advantage. This is the easiest place to vote on in the round. The negative makes a couple of responses, so let's address them. The first is that they tell you that white and charismatic leaders will always win because of the likability factor. The affirmative has a couple responses here that should be enough to buy the AF ballot. The first thing here is that they ignore all the analysis that tells you that most of student populations are diverse and they want to see people like them in office. The negative makes one response here. So they say that likability does not equate relatability. I tell you that this is completely wrong. Being able to relate to someone leads to you being able to like someone. That is part of the analysis that we give to you in the PMC. The second clean extension here is that 69% of students are diverse, but 74% of the college senators are white. What we see here is that the negative misappropriates our evidence. They talk about senators when we are talking about 70% of the college senators are white. There is a miscorrelation here between the amount of undergraduate students and the amount of leadership that does not accurately reflect them. The second point under here is that they say that there's there's a miscommunication in the block where the second negative says that there's no actual link between grades and diversity, and then the third negative comes up and tells you that there actually is, and they can extend these impacts. Number one, note this contradiction, but number two, the response here is that yes, there is. You are more likely to study when you trust the university leadership. And number three, they concede too much analysis on this advantage that tells you that we read to you like 3 different warrants that the Department of Education states that an increase of diversity in leadership leads to an increase in grade rates. Like, this is like a huge point that they just say with like no, that doesn't actually happen. They don't give you analysis here. Like, that's not true. We give you it throughout the entire debate that they just ignore. The final response that they make on this advantage is that the second negative tells you that the value of college is going down. We tell you that this is absolutely false. We tell you that number one, they concede that the median salary of college graduates is way higher than the median salary of graduates of people who don't attend college. And number two, the second piece of analysis that you can buy here is that it's still really important. Jobs like computer science, which are probably one of the places that don't care as much about college degrees, still require a college degree. We see that the second negs analysis here is not good enough for them to win on this advantage. The implication is that you can pull the trigger specifically on the diversity advantage here and vote AF. The second place you can vote AF is on the democracy point. Again, there's not good enough neg analysis here as to why you can't vote AF here. Specifically, they're conceding too much of analysis that tells you that colleges are these bastions of political purpose, which means that they have a role in facilitating our ability to participate in a democratic government. They're conceding too much of this analysis, and we tell you specifically that when you extend this across the flow, we increase democracy when you teach students how to campaign and be politically active. Those are things that comes with this democratic process of electing. Okay, let's move on to the negative. The negative tries to go for like a crazy amount of outs in the block, but ultimately what I'm going to tell you is that they're really speculative, and that the second negative stands up and gives a lot of really faulty logic. Number one, on expertise, he strawmans the argument when we say that like people will know who to vote for. He says we don't let children vote. This is a ridiculous straw man on a refutations here. Students are smart enough to know what candidates are good and what candidates are bad. If not, like they said, there will be student groups who will campaign and who will let them know what candidates have a chance of winning. The implication is that you don't vote on expertise, number one, and number two, you don't vote on politics because they talk to you a lot. And then back onto like the expertise stuff. The second negative brings up this warrant of Trudeau, and he tells you that at local levels, like appointed officials are better. I'm going to tell you no. You buy the golden turn here in the PMR that tells you that like Jennifer Yang, a school board official in the Lafayette like area, was able to stop like book bannings in schools because she was elected by people that want to see this happen. There's a ton of people who did not want like books on LGBTQ education like in our libraries on the board, and if they had appointed the other candidate, then we would have not have seen those books within our own school systems. The third out that they try and go for is like engagement. They tell you that students aren't particularly like active, but number one, they concede the entire logic of our first affirmative advantage, which tells you that like schools are this really this like really like bastions of like a political purpose. Then on like logistics of elections, like this is a really weak point. They tell you like it's hard to run the elections. I tell you no, it's not. Like they don't give you any reasoning here. But number two, we tell you that there's two responses. You can do it online, number one, and number two, the ballot is easy. It's one person you're voting for. They tell you that, oh yeah, local ballots get really complicated, and then the second negative stands up and says you don't vote for your congressman or congresswoman. That's just fundamentally not true. Basically, everyone I know votes for people at their local elections. For those reasons, like there's no clear neg out here. I strongly urge an affirmation ballot.
Good
Good
round.
round.
Thank you, judges.
Thank you, judges.
Yeah, could you put that article about diversity and grades in the chat? I want to read it now.
Oh, actually, no, I think I put it on our doc.
Okay.
Yeah.
But wait. Well, first of all, there's like no fact checking of Parley, but if you really want it, we can send it.
Yeah, we'll send it to you.
Recording stopped.
Teresa, are you okay, judges, with recording the feedback portions? Any objections?
No objection, but I'll leave it to the other judges.
What's that? No objection?
No,
Okay.
yeah, this is Jeff. No, no objection if you want, if you actually want to record us.
No, yeah, I asked because I wasn't sure and I was informed that, yeah, it's useful for the kids as a learning tool to hear like the kinds of things that judges will feedback on.
Well, that's fine with me.
Okay. Teresa, do you know how long we usually wait for feedback?
It depends.
Okay.
So yeah, depends.
Okay. I help with running the tournament, but I am not a judge, so. I'll just hang out.
Yeah,
But,
if somebody's writing a really complex RFD, it can take a while, 15 plus minutes. I've seen it.
I've heard
Nice.
RFD. What does that stand for?
I think reason or rationale, whatever, for decision.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Hi there. I was the last to vote. And I suppose, am I the only one, probably, Mark, Teresa, who knows the result because of that?
I think so.
Okay, so
No.
so it's a government, or I'm sorry, hold on. Who's who? It's an opposition victory 2-1. And Mark and Teresa are in the majority, and I'm in the minority.
Jeff, do you want to give your reasons why, given that you were the minority voter?
Sure. No problem.
Recording in progress.
Very good. So I guess my personal views that have nothing to do with it would probably be very different than how I saw the debate round. So I tried to keep it tabula rasa in terms of what went on inside the debate. I think that what I saw happening was in the early opposition speeches. I got the concerns about the campaigning that would go on campus and the potential disruptive effect. But as the debate went on, that point made in the initial opposition really dropped away. And what seemed to shift was that the opposition tended to agree by the time we got to the rebuttals with the value system that the government had laid out, which was democracy and diversity. And the opposition was saying, hey, your system's going to elect rich white people. And so we can achieve diversity. We, the opposition, we achieve it better under the status quo. And I felt that the largely unrebutted, it's not that I was relying on if it was Department of Education or not. I was just simply taking the arguments about if students see people who are more like them, they're going to want to participate more, they're going to engage more, they're going to be more involved, that since really the opposition shifted more to the government's value system, I felt that the arguments, and particularly I think Marcus's rebuttal speech was quite powerful in pointing out that they achieved those goals. And I did agree with the government that some of the opposition arguments were fairly implausible, particularly if the standards are, as they agreed, you're trying to achieve diversity. I think the government system would do that more likely. I want to be clear, I'm not debating, and I was, I don't say surprised. I thought that the opposition was probably going to say diversity is really important, but there are other concerns we have that outweigh it. So it was really that shift to buying the diversity as being the value and who could achieve it best that probably led to the vote, my vote.
I'll go next. I'll jump in because it's actually an interesting point that you made, Jeff. And I kind of felt that I think I hear you and I would agree. So I think that the Gov team gave a very good debate, very strongly structured. and really honed in on the importance of the diversity to the overall student outcomes. So I thought that was a good one. But I think that for me, the opposition showed that yes, diversity is really important, and that having elections was not the way through diversity, in that kind of likability kind of argument that they made. So, and then having, just identifying how the minority and women fare in current elections. So that was pretty fair, and then having the diversity come through the more through the expertise point was also really important to me. And if we agree with the laid out voter issue, which I did, around, the most important thing is to get the most effective leader, because at the end of the day, we're talking about very large and very important public universities, and that expertise and the lack thereof in the student population, along with the engagement, right? I didn't hear the government necessarily respond really well. I think you gave a very good point early on around the engagement is low in the current environment, and so we need more civic engagement, and I liked that point. But I feel like it sort of fell into for the upside when they sort of said, like, why are we going to get more engagement in colleges than we do now? So therefore I voted for opposition, but it was a tough decision, and really, really good job to both teams.
Yeah, okay. So I voted for the op, and to make it simple, okay, so I guess the main points on the gov were diversity and democracy. So yeah, certain things like I think the gov made the statement in the last speech, like students are more likely to study when they trust their university leadership. I mean, I don't know what the evidence for that was, so I just kind of have to kind of logic it out, and does that make sense? I'm not sure that it does. It's like, if our nation were to elect a president who doesn't match my demographics, that doesn't mean that I would like work any harder at my job and providing for my family. It's a self-interest thing. So I just don't know that I bought that. Then the democracy, I mean, I guess I heard a parallel with like political democracy. I mean, students do have the ability to transfer to other universities if they don't like the direction their university is going to. It's not quite the same as like, oh, I can just pick up and move to France if I don't like the way the government is headed. So I don't think it's as key in a university setting. On the op side, I did buy that the student body doesn't necessarily have the time and the resources to pick leadership that's going to benefit the students and the university as a whole, as much as, let's say, a board. There's certainly a lot more argumentation that could be had on that point, but anyway, that's the core of it. Good job, both.
Thank you. Good day, opponents.
Good luck next round.
Good luck next round.
Thank you.
Hi, great debate.
Thanks, all you judges and debaters. See you next time.